Subnautica 2 will have multiplayer, and people are already concerned because of that. Now, the good news is I totally understand where you are coming from, and I do see some issues with it, which we will talk about here in the video in just a moment. But I also see a lot of weird concerns which have absolutely no impact on how you will play the game. Like, one of the biggest concerns I've been seeing in the recent days was always, hey, but what is with this feeling that you are isolated, crash landed alone on the planet, and that you are fighting for yourself? There's nobody coming to save you, there's nobody helping you. You are on your own, and you have to figure that out. Well, that's not really a problem, is it? Because you are still alone. You can totally play this game in single player. That doesn't really change anything. Now, of course, if they put an NPC with you on this whole thing, then that I can totally understand. And then we have to talk about it again. That is one of the valid concerns I have been seeing being thrown around, that, hey, you might have an NPC with you, which is also talking to you the whole time and maybe even give you some stupid tips like we've seen in other games. If that is happening, that's a problem, right? That is a legit concern. But if they're not doing that and you were actually alone when you were playing the single player again, then I don't really see a problem with it. But there are some actual issues which are coming with the multiplayer, right? And that is when it comes to gameplay stuff. And one of the first one is probably the most obvious one is, what if they are now implementing new gadgets, new toys you can only really use in multiplayer? Think back to Subnautica 1. Think about the submarine in Subnautica 1, which was technically designed for 3 people, but you could manage alone. Now, think about Subnautica 2. They're bringing in an even bigger sub. But for this, you definitely need at least 2 people, 3 people, or even 4 people. That would mean you cannot use it. You would lose out on a tool slash gadget you probably really want to try, but you are getting punished because you are not playing a multiplayer. That is a legit concern where we would have to say, yeah, that's not okay, right? Another thing they have to figure out is resources. You might remember in Subnautica 1 and Below Zero, when you used a resource, that resource was gone. No respawn. Well, most of them. No respawn, right? And when you now have 4 people, you technically need 4 times the amount of resources. Then you might run into the problem that you are running out of resources faster. So the next question would be, does it now respawn? Is the world big enough to sustain enough of people and all that, right? Like, this is something they have to, of course, figure out, and which might be a concern. Another thing which I see as a concern is story. When you are looking back at Subnautica 1, you were just, well, swimming for yourself through the big ocean, and you were finding story aspects, environmental storytelling, or sometimes things happened slash triggered when you got near to something, like the PDA was talking to you, or some other things were talking to you. No spoilers here. And you are like, yeah, okay, that's cool that I experienced that because I was there. But can you imagine how that will work when one of your friends is like going into another direction, finds something, triggers something, and it only pops up once, and you would have missed out on it? Like, that would be legitimately kind of shitty, right? Like, you want to experience that at the same time, so you always have to be close, you always have to be super tight, and sometimes people don't want that, right? So they have to figure out how they can still convey the story in a really interesting way when you have multiple people who could trigger it, right? So that is another legitimate concern I've been seeing. But beyond that, I think they will manage. Like, keep in mind, this is not their first multiplayer game. Before they made Subnautica, they actually had a pure multiplayer game, which worked out pretty well. And another good news when it comes to multiplayer, we don't just want to talk about the bad things here, is that they now switched from Unity to Unreal Engine 5. Now, I know when people are talking about Unreal Engine, it's always about graphics, right? Like you were always thinking about, oh yeah, Unreal Engine graphics. But an engine nowadays is so much more. It also brings, in this case, Unreal Engine is bringing a multiplayer framework with it. So it is much easier for people to connect with each other, and it is much easier for the developers to actually implement a good and functional multiplayer, right? So that is a huge step forward when it comes to how well the multiplayer will be, because Unreal Engine is already bringing a pretty good framework with it. So I see that as a positive note. And I am curious about the multiplayer. Like, as somebody who has played through Subnautica 1 multiple times, who has finished below zero, I sometimes had moments where I thought, oh man, I would have loved to experience this with a friend. Or, Mommy, I'm afraid, please hold my hand. Those kind of moments. And having a friend at that moment would have been probably nice. So I'm definitely looking forward to the multiplayer. But the thing is, we just don't know enough right now. So we have to wait till we are seeing it in action or getting more detailed information. With that said, if you want to keep up with those detailed information and more Subnautica videos in the future, please don't forget to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. I would appreciate it. Till then, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.